Hello. Yeah, so that office was done exactly 10 years back actually, and I think the project Shilpa showed was slightly kind of older, and we'll kind of move on to some of the newer work that's engaged the office for a while. This is the housing project which we're going to show, and I think if you look at our urban landscapes today, the kind of housing one normally sees oscillates between these two kind of very extremes. The one on the right is kind of very formalized, but it also kind of brings an incredible amount of sameness in the landscape, where we have the same kind of apartments and the same kind of houses, flats, whatever you may call them, repeated endlessly, extruded. And even though you see one building against the other, probably done by different developers or different agencies, the kind of landscape that tends to emerge is very, very monotonous. And on the other side, we have the informal kind of housing, which is also a very, very large part of our landscape, but at the same time has incredible amount of variety that you see within that, and an incredible amount of personalization or individualization that one sees. So we were kind of very interested in that, and we're kind of looking at what else is happening in the world of design. And there are kind of lots of trends that one kind of tends to see. The very simplest thing people tend to do to kind of personalize things is have this very do-it-yourself kind of approach, where you can create a certain amount of individuation based on what you like and do it yourself basically. Today, everything from cars to your clothes are something that you can actually personalize, and even kind of large companies would help you kind of do that. So you have a very kind of individual ownership of the article you kind of buy or wear. At the same time, if you look at designers, on the left, for example, product designers are looking at the idea of mass production, which is happening through machines, but also looking at how can you kind of leave that mark of production onto these objects, so that every object is actually different, even though it is actually mass produced. And similarly with that stool, that the process of the stool is such that it's kind of inflated with air, and every time the air kind of fills that metal kind of stool in a different way. So every object, even though it's mass produced, is actually very, very different. And similarly, you get the idea of crowdsourcing, which is very, very kind of common as well. For example, when you involve a lot of people across spectrums, of course, these days with technology, mass media, whatever, to come up with things that are not the hand of an individual alone. And I think that's something that was really interesting kind of us, that what can architects kind of do? I mean, why are we kind of being left out? Why are we like 20 years behind the rest of the industry, or where society has kind of moved in some sense? And the kind of project really kind of starts from that question in a sense. So what we did is, we started with a very simple module. We were given a bunch of unit sizes, and we started with the idea of a 40 square meter room and a kind of very habitable kind of width of 3.5 meters basically, with a 3 meter height. What we thought could happen is that, what if you raise this height to 4.5 meters, and that additional volume in a sense would give you the possibility to add a kind of loft inside, which besides adding kind of cubic feet to your house, allows you to kind of add this small little loft, which can then become kind of an individual kind of half room, so to speak. And that was, of course, again inspired both by the existing kind of buildings that were on site, which are these kind of old semi-colonial inspired buildings where you have nice good heights, so it kind of it's a way to deal with our climate as well. So kind of hot humid air is kind of exhausted through the higher levels. and what you would find in kind of informal settlements as well, where even in the smallest of footprints, people would add a small loft to kind of help double their area or increase their area at least. So with that basic kind of unit, we said, what if you kind of attach a small little terrace to each of these houses, and that becomes your kind of extension and your connection to nature. So the entire housing complex, in a sense, is designed on this kind of module of 3.5 meters, and one begins to see a kind of variety of types that kind of emerge from this very simple configuration of this tube, in a sense. So even the commercial component, and there are some banquet halls and everything, all are kind of worked out with this kind of module. And I think to look at mass housing, one has to look at a certain amount of efficiencies built into the system, and the module actually really helps achieve that. At one point we were actually looking at whether one could even like precast these kind of elements which could actually be used for kind of faster construction. That's not what we eventually ended up doing, but it was very strongly kind of considered at that point. But then we said that, is it all we can do? Can we actually kind of do far more than this? And we went kind of to the next stage, where we looked at a lot of elements that actually constitute the house which we would be doing, and we can kind of just go through some of these. These are like some screens that happen in a house. These are some of the railings which kind of happen. So basically, instead of just doing one standard railing across kind of the entire complex, what if you had 5 different types of railings that people could actually choose from? Similarly, we had kind of these lofts, and there are 3 kind of different configurations of staircases. One is like a little spiral, one is a kind of a straight ladder, one is like a linear staircase. And what begins to happen then is, actually, sorry, I think I missed a few slides, but anyway. So you get this kind of matrix that begins to emerge, which is of different house sizes. So you have everything from a 1 BHK to a 5 BHK villa that happens, and you begin to get, oops. Where did it go? It shut down. So you get a kind of matrix that, like I was saying, that you can choose the size of the house. For example, if you look at the first, the top left house size over, which is 40 square meters, even within that you're getting actually 4 different configurations which you could actually pick from. And similarly, you have 2.5 BHK which has 2 different types, and then there is a 5 BHK villa, or you have 2 different types of, there's a 2 BHK and a 3 BHK row house. So there's a incredible variety of house sizes and house configurations within those sizes, and then everything from like a window to a screen to the kind of terraces that you have, your railings, the kind of garden you have, everything can actually be configured as per your liking, and that extends all the way to your flooring, for example, your colors, the bathroom tiles. And of course this is not endless, so we have a kind of pick of 5 or 4 to 5 of these, and then people could actually pick whatever they like within that. So you could actually create, in some sense, your own unit based on the choices that you make over here. So we actually thought that this is something that could actually even be something that you could make an app out of, where you could you know, have homeowners actually picking very conveniently through a kind of user-friendly method the kind of colors that you like, the kind of windows that you like, and creating your own kind of house, so to speak. So it becomes in a sense something that you put together yourself based on your kind of personal likes and dislikes. So these are the different kind of gardens which kind of happen, and of course I think yeah, just keep going. Yeah, so this diagram actually pretty much shows you that you can actually pick all of these things to create kind of your own unit. I think we are running 1 or 2 slides front and back, but anyway, go on. Come back to this. Okay. So this is the actual site as we found it. It's a 4-acre lot in Lonavala, which was an old kind of Parsi sanatorium with these lovely mature kind of trees, and some fairly good lot of kind of existing houses as well. The only kind of negative, if one can call it that, is the fact that it's touching the train line, and one can see it on the topmost slide that it's actually at a fatak, which is like a railway crossing, and the trains kind of go right by. So that's the kind of context of the physical site that we were dealing in. So we're just going to show how we took that basic kind of unit that we designed, which is of this tube, and kind of have put it together to create kind of a plan for the entire complex. So this is the basic tube that one sees. What we've done is we've added a branch to it, which primarily contains all the service spaces, which could be things like a toilet or a kitchen. We flip that diagonally in a sense, and the 2 interlocking units create a kind of courtyard in the middle, which is a service courtyard. So all our plumbing is essentially taken in over there, along with all air conditioning units or whatever other services that one needs would kind of go inside and not kind of, you know, spoil the kind of front or back of the units. We array this kind of unit in a linear fashion to create a kind of street. We then break that kind of street length that emerges to allow for breezes to flow through for access through that kind of linear wall-like building, and to allow for vision in between these units. We then stagger them to create a kind of unique condition. So where this was really helpful is that because of the amount of trees that kind of happened on site, we could actually slip and slide some of these units so that we could, you know, dodge a tree or account for some kind of presence of any kind of feature on the site. Then we stack this configuration above, we just kind of repeat it, and we push and pull the top levels as well. So it kind of creates terraces at the upper level, which make sure that everybody essentially has green. So primarily the ground floor units all have gardens at the back, and everybody on the upper level end up having gardens in the front. So everybody essentially has got a nice double height space, 14.5 feet, with a loft and a garden attached to that. In these gaps that were there, we actually again add units at the top level with one room attached to each of the side blocks, so which allows for a 1.5 BHK to become a 2.5 BHK, at the same time leaving the lower level free for breezes and kind of the vision which goes through. To these we have a series of kind of staircases which get attached to them, and they become kind of these walk-ups. So we're really not kind of interested in kind of putting a staircase into a box, but actually kind of pull them out of the building where you can actually see the kind of activity of people walking up and down, and you know, create some kind of life on that street basically. And then there are these additions of these stone walls which actually kind of ground the building, so to speak. And I think this will become a little clearer as we see the photographs. So this is the shape of the site with the kind of approach road and the kind of railway track. What we've done is place the commercial building right in the front. It's a little bit set back from the street to become kind of a gateway building which kind of welcomes you from that very kind of busy junction. Then along the railway track, and this is also in a sense at the insistence of the client, where we've created this kind of green buffer zone, which perceptually at least sets the units back from the noise of the railway line. And then this kind of street that gets created with the way we kind of showed you this configuration of the kind of units on both sides. So you get this kind of very varied kind of morphology that evolves with a kind of linear thing, but it kind of never gets monotonous at any point of time. At the same time, like you saw in one of the earlier site images, we fought really hard to save at least 3 of these buildings, which we will see as we go along as well, which we have converted to a common space for the entire complex, and it becomes kind of a clubhouse and a multi-purpose hall. And the end, which was raised by almost 1.5 meters above the road level, is something we've created as a raised rear courtyard. And around this again, you find a similar series of units that form that courtyard at the rears. And then placed within this, there are 3 large size villas. So you again get this kind of configuration like we were talking about. So there's a mix of unit sizes and program types distributed right across the entire site. Also, if you look at the green, which is representing all the private green spaces, so you get these really small to kind of fairly large gardens for a lot of these units, and the yellow actually represents all the kind of public space where people can actually walk around from one space to the other. This is the vehicular circulation network. Tried to minimize it as much as possible. And then of course there's kind of a pedestrian circulation that allows people to kind of cross circulate. So what you'll see is that the bridge units on the upper street, on the upper row and the lower row are actually staggered. So you get this kind of diagonal kind of movement as well as for kind of breezes to kind of flow through. So this is the kind of site plan that actually emerges across kind of the whole thing. So this is both with a lot of the existing trees and a lot of the new trees kind of that we planted. This, the section below, I think at this point actually shows you that kind of raised kind of platform courtyard at the higher level. Entrance block which we were saying, this is the kind of commercial component of the program. On the left side you see there's 2 floors of banquet halls actually, which could be kind of rented out or leased by somebody, and on the right actually is the entire commercial unit, which has shops on the lower floor, and it has offices on the top. These are some of the, so this is actually looking at the banquet hall area, and this kind of portal that kind of gets created at almost like I think 9 meters height becomes that kind of darwaza to the kind of entire complex. So these are the offices on the upper level. This is looking out from within the banquet hall. So this is the housing itself as it's kind of built out. So you can see the kind of tubes which kind of form the entire kind of stacking of the units. So the lower levels, you can see that you have these porches which are used meant to be for parking, but largely as we've seen them over the last few years are kind of get taken over by people to kind of sit out and kind of use them as verandas. And on the upper levels you can see that you have these kind of gardens that overlook the space. We also designed these smaller kind of entrances So people from the lower floor, this is like under the bridge unit, where you can enter below, and you have these kind of little private porches through which you can enter, which is just below that bridge unit that you can see on the left hand side slide. So you can see the multitude of walk-ups and the railings and kind of screens that kind of happen, and it's kind of always been our imagination that at some point the greenery and kind of nature will begin to kind of take over the kind of whole building, and that's begun to happen slowly and gradually. So this is the kind of upper level terraces, and at the end of that street we have kind of a large double height pergola that kind of terminates that entire sequence. So here you can see that you have the variety of like the bamboo, the metal, the wood, I mean all of that kind of screen. So even though the tube is a system, there is kind of a certain built-in variety within that system, and you can see the kind of colors of the windows, which is constantly kind of changing across all of these. So this is the insides of the unit. On the right you can see the kind of three types which we are describing. I mean one is with a spiral, so it's kind of very basic kind of furnished place. The bottom right image you can see that the kitchen is actually underneath the loft, whereas on the right side but left top you can see that the kitchen is actually tucked into that little branch that the tube has. So there is a lot of flexibility and a lot of variety of types that emerge, and people could actually choose that, do I want a kitchen that's slightly tucked away, or do I want a kitchen that's kind of completely open and part of you know, my living space. This is one of the other smaller units where you can see that there's a loft at the top, and that top left pictures of the loft. So there's plenty of light. We also made sure we gave windows to them, and not only on one side, it actually happens on both sides. So you can get direct light and ventilation to those spaces. In fact, since they have been sold, a lot of people have actually enclosed them on the front as well to make completely kind of private bedrooms on top. So it's actually in effect become almost like a second bedroom. And like you can see, they all kind of spill over into this little garden at the back, or on the right side, the upper level terrace basically. This is the clubhouse which we did, and like I was mentioning, we fought really hard to save some of these buildings. There was an initial proposal where we actually tried to save all of them, but for some reason we were kind of not able to manage that, because you know, this has been done at the end of the day within a kind of mainstream developer model. So I think there are constraints that are already there, and to kind of have pushed ourselves doing all of what we just described, it was kind of you know, rather difficult to convince a client to kind of let FSI go, which is for them like really, really sacred. So there was a set of three buildings really close to each other, and the ones on the left are the kind of condition they were in before we kind of got there. Fairly good stock, stable kind of buildings. And what we did is, if you see the kind of diagramming on the right hand side slide, there were these three kind of blocks which we connected by the addition of these small little pieces in the middle, and that helped link all these three kind of blocks together. There was an additional requirement besides this of a multi-purpose hall, and we couldn't attach it immediately because there was like a grove of trees right next to them. So we actually left a little courtyard and added that little block on the right, and then we just extruded the existing veranda which was there to connect all these three and then the fourth block, and then wrapped the veranda around, basically interlinking all of these four kind of separate buildings together. And that was then extended to create kind of a pool deck and kind of little amphitheater and kind of the pool area itself. So that's what's actually happening in plan. And if you look at it in section, you have this kind of very stable form of kind of the existing building, which was all load-bearing walls. So what we've done in that is the rear lean-to roof was actually an addition done much later, which we actually knocked out and removed. And in the middle, with some kind of structural jugglery by the addition of steel beams, we managed to open up the center so that at least at the ground level, the space is not really divided, but used as kind of a contiguous space for social activities. And in one of the units, we've added a loft as well, which creates a small kind of a reading nook, which again has relationships to the bottom. And the last bit is the multi-purpose hall. So this was a brand new building that we were doing, and we didn't want to kind of just imitate what was already there. So what we did is we took the exact profile of the existing houses and we kind of flipped it vertically, and that gave us the new profile of the roof. So it's completely kind of turned around, and what that does is just inverts the kind of spatiality that is happening in the older buildings, where you have a very protected kind of top and very little light coming in, whereas here this space, because it's a multi-purpose hall, is kind of flooded with kind of natural light. And we also opened up in plan, which you will see, views along the diagonal, so you kind of don't get this sense of constrained space that you get in the kind of original villas. So if you see that kind of end block on the right, you can actually see that the corner actually opens out and then begins to link back to the pool deck, the courtyard, and the pool area itself. Whereas the others, because their corners are like really held, has a kind of very contained and kind of traditional sense of space, basically. So these are some of the sections. So that's the top is kind of through the reading loft over there, and the second section is through this little concrete kind of volume that we've added, which becomes like a connector through the space. I'm just going to go back a little bit. So the little grays that you see between the existing buildings are actually where we chose to put the service spaces. So the changing rooms, the toilets, the showers are all kind of distributed in that space. So go back. This is the linked kind of extended veranda. So it was very interesting that we actually created this out of nothing, because all the other buildings that were being made, dismantled, we picked all the stone of the planes, the columns, the bases, the kind of rafters, the boarding and the tile. Everything has actually come out of the older buildings. So we just reused all of that to kind of extend this veranda right across. This actually, the diagram on the left actually shows the kind of structural additions and alterations that we've done in kind of the unit. So everything that was added was actually done in steel, so it kind of shows itself as being kind of very different. So that's the extended veranda, which, like I was mentioning, is created out of all reused material. These are the kind of units. So this is the end unit that you can see. So it has a little kind of built-in bench. So we've done this in concrete. It's all exposed concrete. One kind of singular monolithic material that kind of just creates all the spaces within. And then there are toilets. So this is the common lounge area with the new steel loft, and that's the kind of reading room that kind of happens above. We also inserted some of these old kind of heritage Minton tiles over there. We didn't have the budget, honestly, for all of it, and we were asked to kind of do only a certain area, but instead of kind of creating these patches like you'd find in older buildings, we've kind of done these more like a kind of a memory of what it was earlier. You know, in some sense, it's almost like the light is streaming through those windows and kind of just highlighted the past in a sense. These are smaller kind of vignettes that you see, like the one on the left is when you sit in that concrete unit, it kind of you look out, that views kind of happen only at kind of eye level, and the others are the steam room and the wet areas. This is the gymnasium, and here you can tell the kind of addition of that steel beam that kind of transfer this load of that wooden truss to allow for the whole center to actually open out. So this is the extension, the new extension, which is the multi-purpose hall, and like you can see, there are these really large sliding doors that kind of open up, and you can trickle out, spill over into that courtyard or right across into the pool deck.